weird arrows, and even weirder quivers. Recently, I stumbled across some rather interesting pictures of warriors and hunters from some islands in eastern Indonesia. The first is Alor Island, and I am probably mispronouncing that somehow. If you have never heard of it before, don't worry, neither had I. Flores Island, on the other hand, should be a bit more familiar as it was where the remains of the so-called hobbit species of hominids were discovered in 2003. The third island is Timor, which is split between Indonesia and the independent nation of East Timor. In the past and present, the natives of all these islands have done a lot of hunting with bows and arrows. They also apparently fought each other quite a bit. When you've got a small island with many tribes, each with a different language, it's not surprising that some miscommunications will arise. They've got some pretty interesting bow and arrow techniques. Perhaps unsurprisingly, some of these methods appear similar to what is used in neighboring West Papua and Papua New Guinea. Much like the Papuans, they use a tertiary grip, which can also be described as a hybrid pinch and fingers grip. And many of their arrows are intricately barbed. More on those arrows later on. But this is the unique part. Look at how they are carrying their arrows. What the hell? They've got a large number of them running through a wide, thick belt, but with the point sticking up, outwards, and completely exposed. What's more, in many cases, the exposed barbed broadheads are adjacent to their chest and face. It's bizarre looking and pretty much the complete opposite of any other quiver in the world. In some ways, it's sort of reminiscent of medieval European depictions of carrying broadhead arrows through the belt, but in this case, it's completely inversed. When I first saw these pictures, I almost thought it was a joke. It seemed utterly impractical and counterintuitive. Surely, the exposed points in such close proximity to the archer's arms, hands, torso, and face could cause some accidental bleeding. After all, most of the photographs are apparently of present-day people who are dressed up as headhunters to provide a photo opportunity for tourists, so you can hopefully understand my skepticism. But, lo and behold, there are apparently historical photographs of natives of both Flores and Alor Islands wearing arrows in pretty much exactly the same fashion. There are sketches of Timorese islanders doing the same thing, but the provenance of those drawings isn't really clear, so take them with a grain of salt. The design is also attested to in ethnographic reports conducted during the 1930s. To replicate the photographs as accurately as I could, I tied my hunting jacket around my waist to simulate the thick and wide belt that the islanders used. I found that this held the arrows very securely, and they did not shift position very easily. Much to my surprise, the arrows did not get in the way while shooting. My arms never bumped into them or got stabbed by the points. One of the things I expected to be an immediate problem was that if I bent down, the arrows would come dangerously close to my eyes. However, with the arrows tucked inside my jacket, they closely followed the contour of my body. The arrows also weren't in the way if I knelt down to shoot. In fact, if one were crouching or hiding in ambush in the bushes, this way of carrying arrows appears to make perfect sense. The arrows occupy the same profile as the body and don't stick out in any way. It is very streamlined. Also, the process of withdrawing an arrow from the belt and readying a shot is very smooth and easy, requiring a minimum of movements. Judging by descriptions of the islanders' first encounters with Western colonists, this arrow-carrying method would have worked well with their preferred methods of ambush and attack from behind dense cover. However, despite some useful aspects and historical evidence for its use, I still have some concerns with the Alorese quiver. I was only able to test a limited number of positions and situations, and I am a firm believer in Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will go wrong. If one were to use very sharp broadheads, some accident with the exposed points seems bound to happen eventually. But there are two explanations that I think might explain why the Alary's quiver was historically popular. The first explanation is not actually a practical reason. According to ethnographies of the island's people written in the 1930s, arrows were at one point used by at least some of the islanders as a form of currency. Arrows were highly valued. Young men often fought over them, and, very importantly, they were an integral part of a man's regalia. So wearing the arrows in such a prominent and ostentatious fashion may have actually been a form of showing off, and not so much a matter of practicality. The second possible explanation is that historically, the inhabitants of these islands may not have always had reliable access to metal to make razor-sharp broadheads. After all, in the ethnographies, the metal arrowheads that did exist were highly valued, even as late as the early 20th century. Much like in Papua New Guinea, arrowheads appear to have been traditionally made out of perishable materials such as carved wood, bamboo, or bone. These materials, though not capable of being sharpened to the same degree as metal, are also capable of being quite lethal. The barbed nature of such arrows would have helped compensate for the reduced sharpness by inflicting extra damage either when the arrow was pulled loose by a human, when the barbs broke off, or when the long length of the arrow caused the arrowhead to thrash around inside the body cavity of a wounded animal. When worn on the Alary's belt quiver, there is still the possibility of being injured by a stabbing motion, but the relatively dull nature of the broadheads would probably have made them slightly less likely to inflict accidental cuts if one brushed up against them. Like a lot of unconventional methods and equipment, I think that the only application that I, as a modern archer, could have for the Alary's quiver is under very specific circumstances. There are speed shooting events at nearly every traditional tournament I have been to, and when I run out of arrows held in the draw hand or bow hand, arrows held in the belt in the Alary's fashion could be a good backup. As for actual hunting applications, hunting in North America is pretty much a one and done affair, so I don't think I will use it for that. Finally, unlike the Alary's Islanders, I do not have a need to show off my arrows as a sign of wealth or manhood.